The valley was silent except for the wind brushing through tall grass. At the edge of the road stood an old stone building, its windows glowing faintly in the fading light. The sign above the gate had lost most of its paint, but one could still read the words, "St. Agnes Home for Children." The letters were worn, like the walls, like the years. Yet someone every morning left a handful of wildflowers by the front steps. It was a house that had been forgotten by the world, but not by heaven. Inside, the wooden floors creaked with every step. A few small shoes were scattered near the door, and a broken clock ticked without rhythm on the wall. The scent of soup drifted through the hallways, thin, simple, but made with care. Laughter echoed somewhere in the distance, followed by the sound of scolding, then giggling again. The home was poor, but alive. Hope lingered here in small ways, quiet and invisible, like sunlight slipping through a cracked window. Among the children lived a girl named Clara. She was 8 years old, small for her age, with dark hair tied by a bit of ribbon and eyes that always seemed to look beyond what others could see. While the other children played or fought or napped after chores, Clara sat near the window with a worn sketchbook on her knees. Her hands were smudged with charcoal, her sleeves rolled up, her face serious in concentration. She drew every day, always the same figure, a woman wrapped in blue, face gentle, eyes full of peace. The Virgin Mary. When night fell and the candles were lit, Clara would sneak into the narrow hallway chapel where a cracked statue of Mary stood. The paint had faded from the figure's face, and one of the hands was broken, yet it remained beautiful. Clara would kneel, open her sketchbook, and whisper softly, "Your beautiful mother." The flame beside the statue flickered, and for a moment the child would smile, as if she'd heard a reply. Sister Helena, the caretaker of the orphanage, often watched from the doorway. She was an older nun with kind eyes that carried both warmth and worry. She had found Clara as a baby one winter night, wrapped in a small blanket at the chapel's doorstep. The girl had grown with a calmness that never left her, as if she carried a secret grace that belonged to another world. But faith alone could not fill empty cupboards. The roof leaked when it rained, the walls were cracked, and the children's shoes had been repaired too many times. Letters from the diocese had stopped coming, and the little that remained from donations would not last another month. A final visit was scheduled from a wealthy benefactor, a man who years ago had promised support, but had since stopped answering the sisters' letters. His visit would decide whether the orphanage would survive. That night, the sisters gathered in the kitchen. The rain beat softly against the window, and the lamp cast a tired glow over their faces. "If he cuts the funding," whispered one nun, "we'll have to send the children away." Sister Helena folded her hands. "We'll pray," she said simply. "Heaven remembers the small." Her eyes drifted toward the window, where she could see the faint light of the chapel flickering in the distance. Clara sat awake long after the others had fallen asleep. She finished her drawing, adding soft strokes around the face, giving the woman a glow that wasn't from the candlelight. She looked at her own hands, blackened by charcoal, and smiled. Then, before closing her eyes, she whispered into the darkness, "Mother, if you ever come, please don't forget this house." Outside, the wind slowed. The rain faded into a quiet drizzle. Inside the dormitory, the girl's sketchbook lay open beside her pillow, the image of Mary catching the last bit of candlelight. And so the night passed peaceful, fragile, waiting for morning. The morning came gray and heavy, with clouds hanging low over the valley. A faint mist clung to the grass as the bell above the orphanage rang its uneven chime. The children hurried about, straightening their beds and wiping the tables before breakfast. Sister Helena walked from room to room, smoothing her worn habit, her heart caught between hope and fear. Today was the day that would decide their future. The car stopped in front of the building, its engine humming quietly. From it stepped a tall man in a long dark coat, his silver hair neatly combed, his shoes too polished for this road. His name was Mr. Armand Leclerc. He was one of the wealthiest men in the region, owner of factories, rail lines, and the large house on the hill that the children sometimes saw shining in the distance. He had once been a generous donor, but time and business had hardened him. He now came only to decide whether this small orphanage deserved to exist at all. Sister Helena greeted him at the door, bowing slightly. "Welcome, Monsieur Leclerc. Thank you for visiting us again." He gave a short nod, his voice calm and distant. "Let's make this quick, sister. I don't have much time." He followed her down the corridor, his footsteps echoing through the quiet halls. The children watched him with cautious curiosity. His eyes moved from the walls to the worn furniture, to the broken staircase rail, to the cracked plaster above. He saw only the things that were failing, not the life still flickering within them. As they passed the kitchen, the smell of bread filled the air, simple, rough loaves baked that morning. "You still make your own food?" he asked, not unkindly, but with a tone of disbelief. "We make what we can," Sister Helena said. "It isn't much, but it's made with love." He gave a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Love doesn't pay for repairs. They entered the small classroom next. Desks uneven, books patched with tape. On the far wall hung dozens of drawings made by the children, some of trees, some of animals, and in one corner, a cluster of pictures that caught his attention. Each one showed the same figure, a woman in blue robes, face serene, surrounded by light. The drawings were simple but hauntingly beautiful. He stepped closer. "Who drew these?" "That would be Clara," the sister replied softly. "She draws the Virgin Mary every day." He frowned slightly. "Every day?" "She says the Blessed Mother visits her in her dreams. Drawing her helps her feel close to heaven." He shook his head with quiet disbelief. Children and their stories. He moved on, but something about the drawings lingered in his mind. The eyes of the figures seemed to follow him as he walked toward the chapel. There stood the small statue of the Virgin, cracked and pale, yet graceful even in decay. Someone had placed a few wild flowers at her feet, tiny, fragile blossoms that would dry out by nightfall. He stared at them, lost in thought for a moment. "This place," he said finally, "has heart, but no future. The world doesn't run on prayers." Sister Helena's voice was calm. "No, monsieur, but without prayer, the world forgets why it runs at all." He looked at her, unsure how to respond. Then, with a short nod, he turned toward the door. "You'll hear from me soon," he said. His tone gave no clue whether that was promise or warning. Outside, the car waited. The rain had started again, gentle at first, then steady. As he opened the door, he glanced back once more at the orphanage. Through a small window, he saw a flicker of movement, the little girl with the dark hair watching him from behind the curtain. She lifted her hand shyly and waved. He hesitated but didn't wave back. The door closed and the car rolled down the hill, its black shape swallowed by fog. Inside the orphanage, Clara stood for a long time at the window, holding her sketchbook against her heart. She whispered quietly, "He looked so sad, Mother. Maybe he just forgot what love looks like." Then she sat by the window and began to draw again, the same gentle face, now with tears in its eyes. Night fell over the city like a quiet storm. The rain had stopped, but the streets glistened under the glow of the lamps. In his grand house at the top of the hill, Armand Leclerc stood by the window, staring into the dark valley below. From there, he could just barely see the faint outline of St. Agnes' home, hidden among the trees. He poured himself a glass of wine, though he hardly drank it. The silence of the mansion pressed around him thick, empty, echoing through marble and glass. His wealth surrounded him in cold perfection. Polished floors, expensive paintings, shelves filled with books no one touched. There were no voices here, no laughter. Only the ticking of a clock, reminding him that time, too, was a kind of loneliness. On his desk lay a folder filled with reports, letters from the diocese, and one small piece of paper that didn't belong, a charcoal sketch. He didn't remember picking it up, but somehow one of the girl's drawings had slipped into his things. He reached for it now, turning it over carefully. The drawing was rough, but alive. The Virgin Mary stood with open hands, her eyes soft and sorrowful, as if she saw everything that hurt and forgave it anyway. There was warmth in those eyes, a depth he couldn't explain. It unsettled him. He had seen hundreds of paintings in galleries across Europe, masterpieces worth fortunes, but none carried this quiet power. He whispered to himself, "Strange. Such beauty from such a poor place." He set the paper aside and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes for a moment, meaning only to rest. But sleep came quickly, and with it, something else. At first, there was darkness. Then, a soft blue light began to grow, spreading like dawn through a mist. He found himself standing in a field of white lilies swaying under the moon. The air was gentle and filled with the scent of rain. In the distance stood a small house, the orphanage bathed in silver light. And then he saw her. A woman in blue walked toward him, her veil shining like silk in the moonlight. Her face was the same as the one from the drawing, calm, luminous, alive. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her eyes met his, and for a moment every noise, every thought, every worry fell away. There was only silence and peace. When she spoke, her voice was soft, almost like a song. "Would you abandon my children?" He tried to answer, but no sound came out. She looked past him, toward the orphanage. Inside its windows, he could see the sleeping children, their faces lit by candlelight. The woman's expression was tender, yet filled with sorrow. "They are mine," she said. "They pray, even when the world does not hear, and heaven listens." He felt tears sting his eyes, though he didn't know why. "Who are you?" he whispered. She smiled faintly. "The love they see when they look toward hope." Then, slowly, she lifted one hand. A soft wind passed through the lilies, and he heard her say, "The smallest heart can carry the greatest grace." The light grew brighter, warm, blinding, holy. Armand gasped and woke with a start. The room was dark again. His heart pounded and his hands trembled. He looked around, confused, trying to breathe. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Midnight. He rose unsteadily and turned toward his desk and froze. The sketch he had left there was glowing faintly under the lamp. The black charcoal lines shimmered with golden streaks, as if someone had traced light along the figure's robes. He touched the paper, but the shimmer did not fade. It was exactly as he had seen her, radiant, alive. He sank into his chair, staring at it in disbelief. "No," he murmured. "That can't be." Yet deep inside, a part of him already knew it was real. Outside, thunder rolled far away, a single echo across the hills. Armand looked toward the valley again, toward the faint shadow of the orphanage hidden in the night. Without thinking, he reached for his coat, snatched his keys, and walked out the door. Moments later, the black car sped down the mountain road through mist and silence, its headlights cutting through the dark. The rain began again, gentle and slow, as if the world itself was being washed clean. He drove without a plan, guided by something he couldn't explain, not reason, not guilt, but a calling. The closer he came to the orphanage, the lighter the rain became, until only soft drops touched the windshield. And as he reached the gate of St. Agnes' home, the old bell above it began to ring slowly, by itself echoing through the valley like a voice from heaven. The first light of dawn crept gently across the valley, brushing the wet grass with silver. Mist hung low over the hills, wrapping the orphanage in quiet stillness. Inside, all was calm. The children still slept, the hall silent except for the soft ticking of the old clock and the distant sound of rain dripping from the roof. Mr. Armand Leclerc parked his car near the front gate and stepped out into the cold air. His coat clung to him, heavy with dew. For a long moment he simply stood there, gazing at the building. It looked even smaller now, even poorer than it had yesterday, yet somehow alive, as though it was breathing in peace that the world could not steal. He walked toward the door and knocked lightly. No one answered. The sisters were still asleep, so he pushed the door open and entered quietly. The air inside was warm and carried the faint smell of candle wax and bread. His footsteps echoed softly across the wooden floor as he made his way down the narrow corridor. When he reached the chapel, he stopped. The small statue of the Virgin Mary still stood where he had seen it before, but something was different. The single candle beside her was still burning. He frowned, stepping closer. It shouldn't have been. He had watched the sisters extinguish it the day before when he left. Yet now it burned with a steady golden flame, untouched by the night or the drafts that slipped through the cracks in the windows. And then he noticed the light on the wall. Behind the statue, the soft dawn coming through the window formed a strange reflection, a glow shaped like wings, shimmering faintly across the stone. The air itself seemed to hum with stillness, as if the room was holding its breath. He turned as he heard a faint sound, a small cough, a shuffle of feet. In the far corner, kneeling on the floor with her sketchbook open, was Clara. She looked up at him with calm eyes. "I knew you'd come," she said quietly. He blinked in surprise. "What did you say?" "She told me you would," the girl answered, turning another page of her sketchbook. Her hands moved softly, tracing a line of charcoal across the paper. He stepped closer. "Who told you?" Clara lifted her gaze, her voice no louder than a whisper. "The lady. She came last night. She said to tell you thank you for caring for her house." Armand froze. His heart began to race. You saw her?" The girl nodded, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "She was standing right where you are now." She pointed toward the front of the chapel. She looked happy. The candle started burning when she left. He glanced again at the flame, small, steady, alive. For a moment he couldn't speak. His throat tightened and the world seemed to blur. Clara went back to drawing, her expression peaceful. On the paper, the outline of the Virgin Mary slowly took shape again, but this time the figure was surrounded by what looked like the orphanage itself, with the children standing at her feet, smiling. Armand knelt beside her, unable to stop the tears filling his eyes. "Clara," he said softly, "why do you draw her every day?" "Because she visits me when I do," the girl said. "She says that when I draw her, I remind her how much we love her. And when people forget her, she feels lonely too." Her words pierced him in a way he could not explain. He thought of his mansion, his empty halls, his lonely dinners, the silence he had built around himself with all his success. Clara looked up again and smiled. "She said you were sad, but she also said you have a good heart. You just forgot what it sounds like." He bowed his head, unable to answer. The candle flickered gently beside them, its flame reflected in the child's eyes. When Sister Helena entered moments later, surprised to find him there, she stopped at the doorway. Armand was kneeling beside Clara, his head bowed, his hands folded. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the soft morning light moved across the chapel walls.
The nun finally whispered, "Monsieur Leclerc."
He looked up slowly, his face wet with tears. "Sister," he said, voice trembling, "I came to end this place yesterday, but it seems heaven has already chosen otherwise." Outside, the clouds began to part, and sunlight poured through the window. The glow behind the Virgin's statue deepened, spreading in a soft halo of light. Clara smiled as the warmth touched her face. And as the old bell above the orphanage began to ring again, not by any hand, but by the breeze itself, the sound drifted through the valley like a promise kept. The days that followed passed like a quiet miracle. The sky seemed bluer, the air warmer, and even the old walls of the orphanage felt alive again. The nuns whispered that Monsieur Leclerc had changed, that he had come back the next morning, not as a judge, but as a friend. He arrived with papers in his hands, not contracts to close the home, but documents to preserve it. He sat across from Sister Helena in the small office, his tone calm, his eyes gentle. "I want St. Agnes to remain open," he said. "Not just for now, for as long as I live." The nun blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "You mean you wish to fund it again?" He smiled faintly. "No, I wish to belong to it, to help it grow, build an art room, a garden, a proper roof. Let these children see the beauty they were born for." She folded her hands, tears welling in her eyes. "Monsieur Leclerc, what changed your heart?" He hesitated for a long moment, looking toward the small chapel through the window. "A promise," he said quietly, "and a dream I can never forget." By the end of that week, workers arrived. They repaired the roof, repainted the walls, and planted flowers around the front gate. The children watched in wonder as ladders climbed the sides of the building, and the smell of fresh paint filled the air. Laughter returned, not the fragile kind born of distraction, but real laughter, free and bright. Clara spent most of her time in the new art room Monsieur Leclerc had built beside the chapel. It was filled with light tall windows, shelves stacked with paper, brushes, and paints. For the first time, she could draw in color. She painted skies of gold, robes of blue, and faces of peace. The Virgin Mary appeared again and again, each time slightly different, as though she was smiling through the child's hands. Armand visited often. The children had grown used to him now. Some even ran to greet him when he arrived. He would sit in the garden, his coat folded beside him, watching them play. Sometimes Clara would bring him a new drawing, shy but proud. One afternoon, she brought him a painting unlike the others. It showed the Virgin Mary holding a small child with brown hair and gentle eyes. Around them were flowers from the orphanage garden, lilies, roses, and daisies. At the bottom, written in uneven letters, were the words, "Thank you for not leaving us." Armand stared at it for a long time. His throat tightened, and he felt a tear roll down his cheek. "It's beautiful," he whispered. Clara tilted her head. "Do you think she likes it?" He smiled. "I think she does." He hung the painting in the chapel that same evening. As the candlelight touched the colors, the image seemed almost alive, the Virgin's eyes soft, the child's smile glowing with quiet joy. From that day on, the orphanage became more than a refuge. It became a place of light. Children from nearby villages came to study, to play, to paint. Visitors left donations not because they were asked, but because they were moved by what they felt: their peace, warmth, and something that words could not quite explain. One evening, as the sun was setting, Armand stood by the chapel door while the children sang their evening prayer. The melody rose softly, carrying through the open windows into the golden air. Sister Helena joined him and said gently, "You've given them back their home." He looked toward the statue of Mary, now fully restored, her hands whole again, her face shining beneath the candlelight. "No," he said softly, "they gave me mine." Helena smiled, placing a hand over her heart. "You found what money can't buy." He nodded. "Love," he said simply, "and peace." As night fell, he lingered alone in the chapel. The flame of the single candle flickered, casting soft light across the Virgin's face. He closed his eyes, whispering into the silence, "Thank you for reminding me who I am." Outside, the stars appeared one by one, quiet witnesses to a man's rebirth. The valley, once forgotten, now seemed to hum with life, as if heaven itself had drawn its own masterpiece upon the earth. Years passed gently over the valley, like sunlight moving across a quiet field. St. Agnes' home was no longer a forgotten corner of the world. The walls gleamed white, the gardens bloomed with color, and the laughter of children drifted over the hills each morning. The place that once trembled on the edge of closure had become a small beacon of hope. Clara grew up in those same hallways. Her drawings covered the walls of the art room: angels, faces of the saints, and above all, countless images of the Virgin Mary. Each one different, yet somehow the same, serene, luminous, motherly. Visitors often stood in silence before her paintings, unable to say why they felt so deeply moved. Some said the eyes seemed to follow you. Others said the light in the paintings was not paint at all, but something unearthly. She was no longer the shy child hiding by the window. She was now a young woman, gentle and confident, her hands still stained with charcoal. She began teaching the younger orphans to paint, telling them that every stroke could be a prayer if done with love. "We paint," she would say, "because heaven likes to be remembered." Monsieur Leclerc, now gray-haired and slower in step, continued to visit. The children adored him. They called him Papa Armand, and he laughed softly each time, though his eyes often grew wet. He had sold parts of his business empire, keeping only what he needed to sustain the orphanage and fund scholarships for the children who grew up there. He no longer lived in his vast mansion on the hill. Instead, he kept a small room in the village, overlooking the church bell that rang every evening. One spring afternoon, as the flowers began to open, Clara came to visit him. She brought a bundle of papers tied with blue ribbon, her newest sketches. She sat beside him on the bench under the old chestnut tree and said, "They're for the cathedral in the city. They want to hang them in the chapel." He smiled, holding her hand. "Then your art will reach places I never could." She shook her head. It's not mine. She paints through me. I just hold the pencil." He looked at her with quiet pride. "Do you know, Clara, that you've changed me more than anyone ever could?" She smiled softly. "I didn't do anything. She did." They sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the leaves. For the first time in years, he felt the deep peace that had once visited him in his dream, the same light, the same warmth, living now in this world through the love of a child. As the seasons turned, time began to claim its due. Monsieur Leclerc grew weaker, his hands trembling, his voice gentler. On his last visit to the orphanage, he asked to see the chapel once more. Sister Helena and Clara walked with him down the familiar hall. The walls were bright now, and every step echoed with the faint laughter of children playing outside. He sat before the statue of the Virgin Mary, the same one he had once dismissed as cracked and worthless. Now it was restored, its colors soft and radiant, the candle at its feet burning steadily. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the very first drawing Clara had ever made, the one that had followed him home so many years ago. As he unfolded it, his eyes widened slightly. Something had changed. The faint golden lines that had once shimmered after his dream were still there, but now, across the bottom, were words he had never seen before, written as if in light itself. "The love you give my children, you give to me." Tears filled his eyes. His voice shook as he whispered, "So this is what it meant." He placed the drawing at the feet of the Virgin and bowed his head. For a long time he said nothing, only breathed, softly, peacefully, as if finishing a prayer he had begun years ago. When he finally looked up, the chapel was filled with a warm glow. Sunlight poured through the window, turning the dust in the air into floating gold. Clara stood quietly beside him, her hand over her heart. Sister Helena crossed herself and whispered a prayer of thanks. That evening, as the bell of St. Agnes rang across the hills, the valley seemed to shimmer. The children sang in the courtyard, their voices carrying up into the light. In that moment, heaven and earth felt close, as if one could reach out and touch the border between them. Years later, when Clara's paintings hung in cathedrals across the country, she never forgot the little chapel where it all began. Each time she painted the Virgin Mary, she added a tiny detail, a pair of hands open in blessing, with children gathered beneath them. At the base of every painting, she signed the same words, "For St. Agnes' home, where love was drawn and heaven smiled." And so the story of a poor orphan girl and a weary man became a quiet legend. Not of wealth or power, but of grace born from one child's faith and one man's awakening. Because sometimes miracles do not shake the earth or split the skies. Sometimes they appear in the silence of a drawing, in the kindness of a heart rediscovered, in the flame of a single candle that never goes out.